Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today I thought I would give my thoughts on the second open test for Enlisted. Now if you actually want to go and see some of the media around the open test, I've left some link in the descriptions to basically what was new and also, what was available. So, the new vehicles, the new weapons, they also talk about a better graphical system, which for me, I don't think I noticed too much, but then again, maybe it was because of my settings. Obviously, those new maps and everything like that, and they've even already put in a results of the open test showing that 47,950 players were playing the open test, so it shows that there is an interest in Enlisted, which is great to see, and I thought why not just give my thoughts on it. So last time we had a look at Moscow. Obviously that was the first pre-alpha open playtest that was available to us, and now in the second one we're now in Berlin, so much more late war, much more late tech when it comes to, the vehicles and also the weaponry, and that was definitely on show. Instead of stuff like T-26s, we had T-3485s and IS-2s. Instead of stuff like Panzer IVs, we had stuff like Panthers and Tiger 2Ps. So you can see the massive difference in general usefulness of the weapons and also how everything worked. So let's, first of all, I'm going to split this into categories. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is my general feelings of it, comparing it to the first alpha. Then we're going to talk about the new mechanics which are added, such as the academy system, and also some of the stuff in-game, such as the mortar system and the mortar addition squad, and then also some of the monetization options which it looks like that they're going for. So let's get started with the general feelings. The first thing that I must say is after playing the first and second alpha test of Enlisted, I am still amazed at how nice the game feels. I was getting a straight up 60 FPS experience, and obviously I was running VSync, so I'm sure I could have gone a lot higher than that, but at least when it came to my frame rate, it was incredibly stable, no matter what was going on, and I had everything cranked up to full. So pretty much the only time where the frame rate really dipped below, let's say, 50 FPS was when there was so much stuff going on in the battlefield I couldn't even tell what was going on, meaning artillery was coming down, mortars were coming down, people were dying left and right, and also the fact that there was just shots going everywhere and fire everywhere because of stuff like Molotovs. So for me, I would say that the game right now seems to be incredibly well optimized for an alpha. I've played a lot of alphas in my time, especially when it comes to stuff like this, and this is actually a pre-alpha experience, so this isn't even technically an alpha, and the game already runs really well, so that's lovely to see. The squad-based game, so the idea that you have around you, a base of AI squad members, is really intriguing still. The fact that you can kit them up in different ways, the fact that, you can have all of these squad upgrades, which you can add different players, some people to your squad, obviously through an interesting system which we'll get into, but the main thing is it's not as punishing as other games. One of the problems I have with games such as Red Orchestra, when it comes to its multiplayer or Postscriptum, or when it comes to Hell Let Loose or Squad, when you die, it takes you ages to get back to the action, back to the battlefield. Now, a lot of other games have actually fixed this issue. Either you go the Call of Duty way, which they used to do, which was smaller maps and also maneuverable respawn points, so therefore, the map would constantly change depending on where you were situated, or you do the battlefield system where you can spawn in on squad mates. Well, the fact that Enlisted has done a completely new system in the form of this squad-based mechanic of AI units means that even if you die, you are straight back into the action pretty much instantaneously, and depending on how you have, maneuvered your squad or, whether they're following you, you can literally be right there, right in the action straight away, which is incredibly fun and incredibly interesting. It also means that it's not as punishing. So let's say that you have somebody who's camping a specific area with a specific unit. If you get killed by him, well, guess what? You can pretty much just get one of your next people and try and take him out. So it means that the gameplay is a lot more fluid, it means that there is a lot more running around, it means that, you know, there is a lot more action very quickly. And as a person who is not very good at FPSs, I generally struggle in the FPS genre just because I'm not very good at twitch shooting, I'm not very good at firing, you know, as I go around. It is kind of nice to have like a bunch of AI just running around the place, because I can, you know, take them out, and even if the AI is shooting back, and at least they were getting a little bit more competent when it came to when they were being upgraded, it meant that, you know, there was people for me to fight which weren't exactly, you know, hardcore players. And therefore, you know, out of a squad of, let's say, 5 or 6, you would have obviously one person who was incredibly hard to kill, who would be the player, and then you had the 5 other AI which were just running around behind him. So therefore, it inflates people's KDs, it makes them feel better, it means that, you know, the game is more focused around general squad-based mechanics instead of single individual performances, and I think overall these are just better features when we generally think about these style of games. As I said, it's less punishing, it's more enjoyable than something like Red Orchestra, where you walk or run to the battlefield, get shot in the head by somebody in a bush, and then you do it all over again, hopefully eventually, you know, trying to garner that next capture point, or you just get hit by artillery, yada yada yada. And yes, a lot of these things do exist in Enlisted. You know, you do get sniped out of nowhere, you do get hit by artillery, you do get hit by mortars, you get shot by a tank, but because you have this squad mechanic in the game, it's less punishing, so therefore you can get back on your feet much more quickly. The gunplay still feels really good. The guns in general, they've actually added recoil to some of them that didn't have it before, so therefore there are still some, such as the MP40, the MP38, which had pretty much no recoil, but stuff like the SVT had recoil, and generally the guns played really nicely. The bolt actions I thought were pretty well balanced compared to, you know, stuff such as the SMGs. The bolt actions were pretty much a one hit, one kill, depending on obviously where you hit them. If you hit them in the chest, they would go down, they would have to heal with medikits, or if you hit them in the head, they were just dead. And then SMGs, obviously, was much more, you know, rat-a-tat-a-tat-a. It felt like each gun had a little bit of a place in the game, apart from maybe the sniper rifle, but I think that was more down to the maps, because the maps were quite small. So yeah, the gunplay still felt really nice. In the first alpha test, it felt really nice, and these new sets of guns, these more late war guns, also felt lovely. There was also an addition which I really liked, and it was this Academy tab. And what this Academy tab did, it was actually not open to you at the start of the game when you opened it. It actually became available to you if you had enough infantry units to be able to put into it. So what the Academy tab was, is if you had like 3 infantry units which you were using as reserves, so they weren't actually part of your main squad, you could put them together and kind of form a better unit out of them. So the idea was you could take 3 infantrymen or 3 assaultmen, and let's say they were all 1 stars, put them together and maybe you get a 2 or 3 star. So this would be a way of taking your additional soldiers who are completely useless to you because they're not in your main squad, and you know they're worse for you for the upgrading part, and you could technically upgrade your squad not by you know, playing with them, but actually just through this academy system. This basically means that if you have, let's say, a 6-man squad, but you have 11 squad members for it, you can then use that extra 5 members to be able to create yourself some kind of new member, whether it be a radio man, a mortar man, or an assault man, or a rifleman, which you wanted, you know, to create, and they would have the ability to get more stars, therefore they would be more competent than the other AIs that you had in the system. It meant that, let's say you didn't get something lucky through the random drops, and let's say you got some infantry members which you weren't happy with, or ones which you didn't need. It means that you can recycle them in order to get something you do want, and that is a system which has to exist in this game because of how the troop reinforcement and weapon delivery stuff works, which is what we'll talk about later. So I like the academy system. Obviously there was timers involved in it, and we'll have to see how that goes forward, but unfortunately the alpha wasn't really open for too long. So looking at an in-depth look at how that whole academy system is going to work is, going to have to be for a later date. But at least on the surface level, I like the ideas. The next point is troop stars. So I saw a lot of comments when I was playing the game on Twitch, and also just in general about the AI being very much brain dead. And I think a lot of people miss the fact that a lot of the AI that people were running around with were 1-star AIs. Generally, you could get AIs technically up to 4 stars, which was the leader of the group, and I actually got a drop, which was a 3-star AI. And once you actually get the perks on them, once you actually upgrade them, a 2-star to a 3-star AI does look completely different to a 1-star AI. They actually shoot back, they look at corners, they seem to try and at least take a little bit of cover, so it does seem that there is some kind of progression system to how good the AI is, and therefore it'll be interesting to see like a 5-star AI. I would love to see what that looks like. Hopefully they're not aimbotting and just running around dinking everybody, but if we look at the progression from, let's say, a 1-star to a 2-star to a 3-star, my 2-stars and 3-stars were popping people with their bolt actions quite frequently. So I'm hoping that that is something which is going to grow a lot, and obviously with these limited alpha tests, once again, it's something we can't get a lot of data on, and I'm sure in the future, either when this game gets released in early access, it's supposed to be released in early access in 2020, so look forward to that. But the other thing that I must say is I'm hoping we get another alpha test which is a little bit longer so I can explore those mechanics a little bit more, because I think it's very easy to say the AI is incredibly dumb, especially since it's supposed to be dumb because it's low stars, but we need to see that other factor. We need to see them at higher tiers to understand if they're still brain dead. The next one is the Battle of Berlin maps. So I thought the Battle for Moscow maps that we saw were generally quite fun. The offensive map, which was pretty much just a take on the Gold Rush idea from Battlefield, which I think personally is a really cool game mode, especially for infantry-focused games. It worked really well, for the Battle for Moscow. In the Battle of Berlin, the general Gold Rush idea where you were able to capture the artillery pieces, because obviously the Soviets in the Battle of Berlin were on the offensive, the Germans were always on the defensive. I thought it worked pretty well, capturing, those pieces. But then there was also 2 domination missions, and stuff started to creep in which were issues. So there was a 5-point domination one, and there was also a 3-cap. There was also a 3-cap domination one, and it was incredibly apparent on the 3-cap domination one. There was one domination point which was in a building, and the 2 were just out in the open, and I literally had a match which lasted about 7 to 8 minutes, and for 6.5 of those minutes, one of those cap points had artillery or mortars on them for that time. This basically meant that it was inapproachable, you weren't able to capture it, and even if you were, let's say, in a tank, which is pretty much impervious to mortars and artillery, you can't capture zones in a tank, so you would have to remove yourself from the tank and then your units would die. So it was impossible to capture those zones because of the artillery, because of the way that you can layer it if you understand what you're doing, and then also the mortars on top of it, which we'll get into. So that is a little bit of a problem when it came to the overall map design and how everything works together. But the domination, the 5-cap domination zone, I thought was pretty nice. It had 3 caps in a row, which were pretty much fighting along a corridor, and then 2 out in the open. There were flanking opportunities. There was even an underground area, but that seemed kind of pointless and out of the way. Maybe there's a way of including it so it's a little bit better, so it's more on the center of the battlefield, but overall I thought the map design for the domination zones were okay. There was one map which was horrific though, and it was a take on the Gold Rush idea, apart from they'd removed the general artillery piece capture points with domination zone capture points. And what they'd done is they'd set it up so the first capture point wasn't too bad. It was in what was known as the American Embassy, and all you had to do was just run in there like a crazy person, just capture it with your squad, and just keep throwing bodies until you captured it. And then the second one, you had to capture 2 points at the same time. One was in a building, one was in an open street. And then after that, you, if you captured those 2 zones, you had to then capture 2 more zones, one which was in an open patch of land, and the other one which was covered by sandbags, or a sandbag fort, let's say, and the sandbag fort could be destroyed, since it was destructible terrain. Now, Enlisted does destructible terrain pretty well, but think about it this way. If you have 2 cap zones, and they're both in an area where the destructible terrain can be destroyed, guess what? It just becomes 2 cap zones which are completely open to the elements, which means they're completely open to enemy fire, and there is no way of defending yourself on these cap zones. And a lot of people didn't even get to that second stage of 2 cap zones, because what you had to do for the first set of 2 cap zones, you had to capture them at the same time, simultaneously. So once you had one captured, you had to capture the other, but what would happen is you would have this cat and mouse scenario where, let's say you captured B, then you moved over to capture C as a team. Guess what? The enemy, the Germans in the sense, because they were on the defensive, would go and capture B, and then you would just keep going to and fro between the points. So you would have this scenario where you would never be able to push forward as the Soviets because of the fact that you couldn't get both points capped. In my time of playing, I must have played that map 5 to 6 to maybe 10 times. As the Soviet side, we didn't win once, and as the German side, I didn't lose. I was running at the time this nice little thing that you can in the Enlisted beta where you can join any team, so you can either be put on the German team with your squads or the Soviet team, so I was able to experience all maps from both sides, and what I found from that was that that map is insanely unbalanced, because even with, you know, those 2 cap zones, the reason why it was so easy as the German side to hold those is, first of all, because the Soviets are on the offensive. The Enlisted devs have decided that those are the ones who have a limited number of respawns. So the defenders have an unlimited number of respawns, so they can just keep chucking bodies into the fire, where the Soviets have at maximum 1,000 respawns, and you get like a few hundred once you capture a zone. So the idea is you're supposed to capture a zone with the few hundred that you have, then it gets replenished, and then so on and so forth. But at the same time, the Germans, because they do not have a limit on their respawns for each of the zones, they can just keep piling bodies on top of each other until you run out of resources. And this is what we saw on that map. We saw that at Bravo and Charlie, you would have, if let's say Bravo was captured by the Soviets, if you decided to try and stick there and hold, while the rest of your team, uncoordinated of course, because there's no voice comms yet, and there's no squad play or anything yet in the alpha, they would go towards Charlie, they would try and cap it, and at that point, a bunch of 3 or 4 German squads would just nuke you at Bravo, because they respawn about 50 meters away from it after they've died. So it was just a horrifically balanced map, even not even talking about, as I said, like the D and E points, which were just out in the open. So whenever you started capping it, same with the C point, by the way, but whenever you started capping it, guess what? Artillery, bang. Mortars, bang. And there was nothing you could do to defend yourself. So the problem with having completely open caps, or the problem with having caps which are designed to be full of destructible terrain, is over time it only benefits the defenders, because what happens is you create a space where in order to push into it as the offensive team, you are left with no cover. So then people can just pick you off because they know where you are, because you're capturing a zone, so you have to be in that zone, and they know positions that they can take just to pick you off, and because there's no cover, even if they can't do that, they can just artillery you or mortar you and you're all dead. So even though, you know, you have the squad-based mechanics which make it so dying isn't as much of an issue, it's still incredibly annoying because there is no way you can win that battle. We had a Soviet team which outtraded the German team 3-1. 3-1 in kills to deaths, and also were able to get to the third stack, so we're able to get to the D and E zone, and even we ran into a brick wall. So that is to say, the majority of my team was so much better than the enemy team. We were out-trading them ridiculously, and we still couldn't do it because you could just keep throwing bodies into the fire. Now, there are simple fixes for this. The first fix is you either put a respawn timer on the German side, so instead of being able to spawn instantaneously back, you put a 10 or 15 second respawn timer on them, or you put a limited amount of deaths on the German side, just like you did on the Soviet side. So this basically means instead of a war of attrition only for one side, it is now a war of attrition for both sides. The other way that you could fix this is once a zone is captured in that two-zone setup, so let's say it's B and C, like it was for the second part, sorry. If B was captured, then it would stay captured. So even if the Germans pushed back and wanted to capture the zone back, they weren't able to do so. That, to me, is how you fix something like that. So those are a few fixes that I thought for that map. The other maps were fine. In my opinion, I still think the Moscow maps in general were better because there was just more cover on them. There was more trenches, there was more houses, so therefore artillery wasn't too much of an issue. These maps to me were way too open, and therefore you got killed in a lot of ways, which was very, very sad. There was also something which was talked about in the literature around Enlisted, the second alpha test, and also you could see in the game. It was 70,000 research, I believe, for each side. You could get access to a plane. Now, these weren't actually available in the alpha, but it was kind of like a teaser to show you that they're going to be available. I just want to put my 2 cents out there. I think this is a terrible idea. I think the idea of having planes in Enlisted is a bad idea. As we've seen from War Thunder and also many other games, planes are a true counter to pretty much anything else. And since Enlisted is going to be a squad-based, mainly or predominantly infantry and ground-based game, you are going to have to somehow add in AA teams to be able to deal with these planes, or you're going to have to make the planes so unusable, let's say like give them like first person view and then only keyboard controls and stuff like that. There is no reason to actually add them. So you're either they're going to be a feast or famine thing. As I've talked about many times in War Thunder, the issue with helicopters is they're a feast or famine mechanic. They're either really good and they take over games, or they're substandard and they don't really get anything done. And this is the way I see aircraft being an Enlisted. I think in general the game would be better if it didn't have airplanes in. Obviously we need to see how they're going to be implemented. I just have my worries because I just look at other games of the similar genre which have tried to do airplanes, and generally airplanes are either really overpowered or just completely useless because of the limitations put on them by the dev team. The next idea was the mortar edition. So there was a mortar squad added. Now, this squad was a general rifleman squad, and then the leader of the squad, or, the mortar man of the squad, had access to a mortar. This mortar had around about 10 shells, a little bit more, and you could fire them within about a second of each other, and it meant that you could lock down an area incredibly quickly. Now, generally, if artillery didn't exist in the game, if you were limited to so many mortar squads per team, I don't think this would be that much of an issue. But because you had this trifecta of the fact that the maps were very open, especially on the domination zones, the maps were generally very spacious, but the mortars actually had an incredible distance that you could fire them from. You could literally just spawn and then pretty much hit the majority of the map because the maps were quite small, even though they were spacious when it came to their flanks. But once somebody started, taking a zone, if the artillery wasn't down on them, you could just mortar them to death very quickly before they captured the zone. So what I'm worried about when it comes to these mortar mechanics is the same thing I'm always worried about in games like this. It isn't fun getting killed by things you can't see. It isn't fun being sniped out of nowhere by somebody who has a superior position than you since you are a new player. It is not fun being able to just get hit by artillery and taken out. And it's kind of nice on the map that you see that, you know, they have the red circle, so you know artillery's coming in, so you can dodge it. But with the mortar, that doesn't exist. You just get hit by it out of nowhere. So generally, when it comes to mechanics like this, I'm against them. I don't like the idea of just dying for really no fault of my own. If I lose a gunfight, or if I lose, let's say, I see a grenade coming in and I don't react, or if I see like a tank coming, or I hear a tank coming, or if I hear artillery shells coming, or I see it on the map, and I die to these things, there is something I could do to prevent it. With mortars, there is literally nothing you can do to prevent it. You've just got to hope that the person who is using that mortar doesn't know where you are or has decided to hit somewhere else. And for me, it's the same issue that you have in games like World of Tanks with their artillery, where a lot of people feel like it is an unfair mechanic because it's the only thing that can kill you, which is, you know, out of your control a lot of the times. Or, you know, even games like Red Orchestra with their artillery when you called it in, when you just get annihilated by it and it's not very fun. The mortar edition was that. And this isn't even talking about the other issues that it could cause. Like, if, let's say you have a coordinated squad of 4 people. You run 2 normal rifle squads, and you run 2 mortar squads. So you, first of all, the first person puts artillery down on a capture point. And let's just say it's 3 capture points. So you have like one base one, which is generally how it works, and then you have one that you contest over. So let's say both teams capture the contest point, and then all you do for 4 minutes or 5 minutes is you basically hit it with, you know, artillery to start with. Then once the artillery barrage is over, you then mortar it. Then once that's over, you hit it with artillery again. Then once that's over, you hit it with mortars again. And then the 5th time, guess what? The artillery has actually come back off cooldown, and you can hit it again. Now, you can technically do this with 4 rifle squads, but the thing is, the mortar, you can actually move, obviously, your cursor between shots. The way it works is it actually uses the map to be able to home in, you know, where you're actually firing. The actual mechanic itself works really well, very smooth, but I'm giving you a scenario where it can be completely broken. And I'm kind of worried about this. The fact that people will learn how to layer their fire, especially if they're in coordinated teams, making areas of the map impossible to go to, and half of the time you won't even know if they're impossible to go to because of the fact that you can't see the mortars coming in. So that is definitely a concern that I have. I think this is solved by putting on the map like a little circle, like a little red circle showing where the mortars are going to land, so you can keep your, in real time, so you can keep your squad away from it if you wanted to still keep mortars in the game, and also put a cooldown on stuff like artillery. So artillery has a cooldown at the start of the map, maybe a minute or a 2-minute cooldown, so people can actually take positions without getting annihilated straight away when they're trying to cap a point. Or make it so each cap point has some kind of physical cover that you can hide behind and not just random open circles. Because as I said before, there was the 3-point capture map where one of them had a house and the other 2 were just open to the elements. So therefore, whoever captured the house, it would just be so much easier to hold because, well, guess what? You know, you can't get bombarded by mortars and you can't get bombarded by artillery. So that is something to think about. I do think there needs to be a change. Otherwise, it's going to be very, very infuriating for players getting killed by stuff they can't see. The next idea is the Panzerschrecks. So they added in some new anti-tank units. I thought they worked pretty well. Last time, what we saw was anti-tank rifles for the Battle of Moscow. I thought generally they were pretty cool. And also the fact that you could use them, you know, on general soldiers. With these Panzerschrecks, you had a captured Panzerschreck for the Soviets, and then you had a Panzerschreck for the Germans. They were different models, you know, so, you know, there was at least that. But for me, I thought they were pretty good. You know, it was kind of funny watching people to start with, using them to clear out rooms and stuff. And to be honest, I'm not too bothered about this because the explosive packs or the Molotovs or the grenades do the same thing. So yeah, it's kind of annoying getting a Panzerschreck to the face, but because, as I said before, because of the not as punishing angle that they've gone for dying, and also with the fact that, you know, it was going to happen anyway just by different means, it isn't too much of an issue for me. One of the problems I did see, though, with Panzerschrecks and also tank guns in general is the amount of damage they did to tanks. It felt like everything was firing APCR. So what was happening is it was penetrating, but it would go in a straight line, and a very small straight line, meaning that taking out, let's say, a tank which only had one person in it, especially if you're like a T-34 and you're just like shooting the gun mantlet of something like a Panther, it was hard to do, you know, because you would shoot for the commander, you would shoot for the gunner, but what if the dude's in the driver position? You literally can't kill him. So for me, it's just one of those things where I feel like the damage of stuff like the tanks and also the Panzerschrecks was not enough against tanks. I still think the balance between tanks and also the weaponry around them is pretty good, mainly because of the limited visibility that tanks have, since they're really stuck to a first-person point of view unless they want to expose themselves with a commander. I think that's really cool. I really think they've actually nailed balancing tanks compared to infantry, where a lot of other games have really struggled with this. So that's great, but I just feel like tank guns and Panzerschrecks should do more damage to them. Once they actually interact with the armor and penetrate, they should actually explode out in a cone, because especially like a T-34-85, you're firing APHE, you're not firing APCR. So it's very odd to me that it's acting like APCR. The next one that we've already talked about is artillery, and how it is kind of an annoying mechanic in the game, but at least there are ways of covering yourself from it, such as hard cover, such as buildings. And also, I do think, as I said, there should be a cooldown at the start of the game for any artilleryman, you know, a minute or two, so you don't get instantly just a ton of artillery all over the place, first of all annihilating your ears, and also making it so the battle is pretty much just delayed by 2 minutes, because it doesn't really do anything else. It just means that the battle around a domination point or around a capture zone is just delayed, and it's impossible to, you know, get past the artillery without nuking at least the majority of your squad. So it's just much better just to chill and wait for the artillery to be done, and then you yourself can actually just go in. So I would put, as I said, a wait timer at the start of battles for artillery. That to me would fix a lot of the issues that I see with it from the start. Now, they actually changed the way that upgrades worked in the game. They favor a coin system instead of a direct RP system. So before, you would get so much RP, and you would be able to put that RP into upgrades and be able to put it into personal upgrades or squad upgrades. And this time they changed to a coin system. So if you got so much RP, you would get a coin, then you could put the coin into whatever upgrade you wanted. Some upgrades cost 2 coins, some upgrades cost 1 coin. I don't think there was a 3 coin upgrade, unless I didn't see it. So overall, it was just a way of making it easier to see on the screen. I'm fine with just raw numbers. I'm fine with a ton of numbers everywhere, but I suppose from a general consumer point of view, you want to make it as simplistic as possible so people understand it. So the coin system is a good idea. And then the last one, which I think is going to be one of the ways that the game is monetized, is a loot box system. There is a loot box system now in the game, and the way that it's going to work is it's in 2 forms. So in battles, you gain experience, right? You gain experience through winning, losing, getting kills, whatever it is. And the general way that the game works is as you progress with research, you unlock specific units. So whether it's an assault squad, whether it's a mortar team, whether it's a new tank crew for your IS-2 or whatever it is. And also along the way of doing this research, you unlock weapon deliveries and also troop reinforcements. So what do these 2 things entail? So if you get yourself a weapon delivery through research, you can pick which side, whether it's Axis or Allies, so Soviets or Germans, and you can just, pick whichever one you wanted. So even if you earn it, let's say in the German research, you were able to pick Soviet weapons, and you would pick, the side that you wanted, you would click the weapon delivery button, and if you had one available, it would mean that you would get a loot box, pretty much. It would contain a gun, it would contain some supplies, whether it be grenades, Molotovs, medikits, stuff like that. And the general idea of these weapon deliveries was that you could then upgrade your squadron members with the new weapons that you got out of this loot box. The same idea goes for the troop reinforcement. So the troop reinforcement, if you got through the research that you were just generally playing with the game, then you would be able to pick either an Axis or an Ally, and you would get a random drop of either 2 or 3 infantrymen, which would be sometimes radio men, sometimes assault men, sometimes, other units. And then you could filter them into your squads and therefore make your squads better. So some of them would have a higher echelon of a 3-star, some would have a 2-star, some would have a 4-star, so on and so forth. So some would have higher skill ceilings than others, and then others were just useless. So as I said, with the academy system, you could take a lot of these extra resources that you weren't using, recycle them, and make better units. So at least there is a recycle feature, but I really don't like loot box systems. I don't really like them in any game. I don't like random chance, especially when you don't know the odds. And my feelings is this is a way that Gaijin can monetize the game, which I will not be happy with, because as I just said, I don't like random chance loot boxes. I'm not a fan of them. I don't like gambling, and this is just gambling by another name. So if it is just a system that is put into the game, and the only way that you can get these loot boxes for your weapon deliveries and for your troop reinforcements, if the only way you can get it is through grinding, by getting more research, and maybe if they put in like a premium way so you grind faster, I would be fine with it. But my gut feeling is that a system like this, and I've seen it in too many games before, a system like this is ripe for abuse. Such as, hey, get this starter pack. It will give you 30 weapon deliveries and 30 troop reinforcements. Hey, you only have to pay so much premium currency to get yourself so many weapon deliveries. And, if you do this as a new player, you'll get better weapons and better troop reinforcements, and you'll be able to take over the game. Do you see how this could become an issue really, really quickly? Not necessarily a pay-to-win thing, because everybody will have access to these loot boxes, but just like, remember in Star Wars Battlefront 2, where they said that everything was available for everyone, and then someone did an actual calculation on how long it would take a free-to-play player to get somebody like Darth Vader, and it was some ridiculous number of hours. Imagine if they do that, but in Enlisted. So let's say there are some really cool weapons, like, there are PPSHs. PPSHs, I was able to use one in the game. Incredibly fun to use and very, very powerful. Same with something as simple as the MP40. There was even the STG-44. Didn't see one of them, but I'm sure that's powerful too. Imagine if that is a really rare drop, and therefore, in order to get that, you have to open up a ton of these weapon delivery loot boxes, and if you're able to, then you get a ton of STG-44s. But if you're a free-to-play player, just playing normally, and you run into somebody who has paid their way through, technically, you could get to that point, but it's going to take you so long to get to it, and you're going to get battered so much by the people who have already paid into it, it's not going to be very fun, right? So therefore, you're going to drop the game, and that's going to kill your free-to-play player base. So this is an issue that we see in stuff like Naval in War Thunder. This is also something we see in helicopters in War Thunder, where what you do is you put in these top-tier premiums, which are as good, if not better, than their tech tree counterparts, and then if you don't have the money to actually to buy these top-tier premiums, then and you're just grinding through the tech tree normally, and you get get to those top tier vehicles, you are at an inherent disadvantage constantly until maybe, you're fully spaded and you feel a little bit better, and then guess what? Then you're finally on equal terms. So you've had to troll through sewage for hours, let's say 50 hours, and then you get the same experience as the person who has just dropped $60. That's not fun, is it? That's horrible. And I'm really hoping that this loot box system doesn't do that. I really hope they go down the War Thunder route of just selling premium for the game as a bonus for the research, for the campaigns that are going to be available. They haven't talked at all about their monetization options or what they're going to do for it, and that kind of worries me, if I'm honest with you. It's something which, I know a lot of companies don't like talking about nowadays, but the problem is if you don't talk about it, when it comes to what you're going to do with it, it means that people can presume stuff, and normally people presume the worst. And right now I am presuming the worst because I've seen many other companies do similar stuff, and I'm hoping that Enlisted, which is developed by Darkflow Software and also produced by Gaijin Entertainment, does not have something as similar to that. So we will see what happens going forward. Hopefully there is another alpha test. I hope that the game, the fluidity of the game stays. It is still an incredibly fun game, and I am looking forward to its release. I'm going to play a lot of it since it's the first FPS that I have personally been interested in a long time. Covers a time period in history that I'm interested in, and also, as I said, one of the big factors for me is dying in the game is not as punished as other games, which as a bad player, let's say, is something which is lovely to see. Anyway, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I'd just like to thank Eugene's Terry, Daniel Stanton, Blackie, Elove Goat, Jay Wilt, Martinez, B. Young, Chris Giltnane, Trigger Hippie, Ambrosius McClellan, and also Samuel Slick for supporting the channel.